Welcome back. In our final lecture for our Philosophy 103 series, we will tackle the question concerning capital punishment. May a society ever put one of its own members to death? Now, I'd like to begin this with a real case, because any ethics that is stuck in abstraction is not an ethics that we can live out. Individual cases really test whether an ethics can be lived. So let's take a concrete example, a real example. In 2013, a little boy named Gabriel Fernandez was murdered. He was 8 years old. Over months, he was subjected to systematic and horrific torture by his own mother and her boyfriend, the very people whose first duty was to protect him. Eventually, they beat him to death. Murdering an innocent child is inhumane enough, but the slow, deliberate torture inflicted by his caregivers is something the word monstrous barely reaches. And so we face a question, and I want us to sit with how we actually feel to see the weight of it. Do the people who did this to Gabriel, caregivers, do they deserve to die? I suspect that for many of us, something rises up immediately and says, yes, of course they deserve to die. And we should not rush past that intuition, because it is one of the most important pieces of evidence we have. If we felt the push that they deserve to die, it is most likely because of something like this. What they did was so inhumane that no lesser punishment would answer it. They took an innocent life, and not just any life, one they were supposed to care for and love. But after our emotions subside a bit, we may have a different reaction. Someone might say that what the caregivers did was so monstrous, so far outside anything a healthy human mind would do, that it is not even clear that they were in their right minds in the first place. But we do not, as a rule, put to death those who are not in their right minds. We treat them, we restrain them, so they can never do this again. We imprison them for life, but we hesitate to kill them. This reaction does not deny the evil of what happened, but it does ask whether killing the killer is the right response. So already, standing over the body of a murdered child, we are pulled in two different serious directions. I think it may be beneficial here to lay out the landscape, since a clear landscape lets us better assess the issue. The first thing to notice clears away much confusion. Almost no one believes that the death penalty is intrinsically good, a fine thing in itself that we should want more of. Nobody argues we should execute more people for the sheer good of it. If capital punishment were intrinsically good, then everyone should have it, regardless if they're innocent or guilty. But so that's not where the debate lies, because that would be absurd. Rather, the real debate lies between two positions. The first says that there are at least some circumstances, whether rare or not, in which the death penalty is permissible or even required. The second says it is wrong in every circumstance, always, no matter the crime, and people arrive at each for different reasons. The first position rests on the idea about justice we have circled around all semester. Justice means giving people what they deserve. When someone deliberately takes an innocent life, they have inflicted a loss so great that only the loss of their own life can answer it, can be proportionate to it. To punish with less would say the victim's life was worth less than the killer's continued comfort. There is also protection that we have to account for. Executing a murder guarantees with a certainty that no prison can match, that the killer will never do this again. We also have to take into account deterrence. The fear of death may stay the hand of some future killer. And if it does, abolishing the death penalty would cost innocent lives. So the first position stands on three pillars: justice as desert, protection of society, and deterrence. The second position, that the death penalty is always wrong, usually begins from the conviction that human life has a worth that does not vanish when a person does something terrible, and that the state should protect life, not take it. On this view, with protection, they would say that life imprisonment already keeps society safe. On deterrence, they say that studies have never shown that the death penalty deters murder better than life imprisonment. In terms of justice, they show, or at least claim, that it grants that the gravest crimes deserve the gravest punishment that we may permissibly impose, but denies that this alone tells us that death is among them, which is the very question at issue. And then there is the added cost, the irreversibility of execution, since, for example, courts can make mistakes. There is also the unequal application, failing more on the poor and on despised minorities, and the worry that when the state kills, it may in fact cheapen the very thing it claims to protect, human life. Now, the deontological ethicist, when we're looking at these different theories, splits in a surprising way in considering these views. On one reading, the death penalty is not merely permitted, but required. To execute a murderer is to respect him as a responsible agent, to take his choices seriously enough where we hold him fully accountable. It is to spare him. When we spare him, we are treating him less than responsible in this view, because we're saying that he is not a rational agent, or at least implying that he's not, when that's absurd. But there is another view in deontological ethics that tries to push the other way. It insists that every person, even the murderer, must be treated as an end in himself, and never merely as a means, and that killing a defenseless prisoner to satisfy the public uses him as a means and violates the dignity that the theory exists to protect. There is also the utilitarian. The utilitarian holds that the death penalty is not inherently wrong, so long as it produces the best consequences. If it truly deterred and saved more lives than it took, then the utilitarian could favor it. But if it does not deter and if there are more costs to it, then the utilitarian opposes it. Notice how the utilitarian is not answering our question with desert at all, like whether this person deserves it or not. Rather, the utilitarian is running a calculation that could come out either way, which tells us that he may be measuring something other than what we most want to know. So that's just a potential difficulty that the utilitarian may have to account for. In this, we're not saying that it's false necessarily, but at least we have to be aware of that potential issue. There's also the virtue ethicist. The virtue ethicist asks not what rule applies, nor what the consequences are, but what a person of genuine justice and genuine mercy would do. Someone who holds both virtues fully and in balance. The answer is not always obvious. A truly just person feels the weight of what was done to Gabriel and will not wave it away, while a truly merciful person is slow to take a life that could still be turned toward the good. The virtue ethicist gives us not a rule, but a question about the kind of people we become depending on how we answer. And then there is the voice of care ethics. The care ethicist asks what the others skip. Not what the criminal deserves, and not what produces the best outcome, but what the act of killing does to us, to the web of relationships we live within, and even to the victim's family. Does executing Gabriel's killers restore anything to Gabriel? Does it heal his family, or bind them to a second death and call it closure? Now, there does seem to be a third position, a position that's becoming increasingly more common in our own day. In fact, it is roughly where the natural law theorist may land. Perhaps the death penalty is not intrinsically wrong. Perhaps in principle there are circumstances in which a society could licitly take a life, and yet it may still be that it ought not to be practiced by us in our own day, not because the death penalty is evil within itself, but because it has become, in our own place, in our own time, inadmissible. And there are three considerations to consider that press on this. First, there is necessity. In earlier ages, a society may have had no reliable way to protect life from a killer except to put him to death. But we have, for example, secure prisons and life sentences now. If society can be protected by locking a man away for life, the necessity that once justified the ultimate punishment is gone. So that's just the first aspect. But then there's the second consideration being human worth. We say some rights can be forfeited, but it is not clear that this holds for the right to life. That right is not given by the state. Rather, the state only recognizes the right to life. So in this position, we really have to ask, can the state take away what it never gave in the first place? Can the state take away one's right to life if the right to life precedes the state and is actually the foundation for it in a way? So that's the second consideration. Another way to put this is in terms of human dignity, how we are having, in our own day and age, we have a more developed sense of human dignity. And we see this, for example, with certain movements like slavery. Before, we used to think that slavery was okay, but now in our own day, we do not think that. And regardless of why that is, there is a kind of development in terms of dignity, in terms of the worth of the human person. So that's the second thing to consider. Then there's the third consideration, prudence. A punishment of this kind makes a final extraordinary demand on whoever administers it. It requires a state wise enough to tell the truly guilty from the merely accused, and the unreachable from the not yet reached. And so the honest question is not first whether to abolish the death penalty, but whether our state, is the kind of state that could be trusted to wield it justly at all. Now, I'll give an example. Part of the rules for ethics, or at least when we're considering ethics, if we don't want to talk about it in rule-based, is that when we do an action, and if we want the action to be good, we have to do it not only for the right reason, but also we have to see that the right outcome could come about. So we should actually care about, interestingly, both what the utilitarian cares about with the good outcome, but also what the deontological ethicist cares about, which is good intent. So both of those matter. Now, we have to consider the fact of whether, in our own day and age, our own state considers the full aspect of justice. So, for example, not merely giving somebody what they deserve, but to consider it in terms of, let me back up. Not in terms of like balancing the scales, that kind of justice, but in terms of giving somebody what they deserve in its fullness. And we'll see what that looks like in a second. So there is a deeper point, as I'm alluding to. We have to ask the question of what is punishment even for? We assume it is about balancing a scale, that someone has taken too much. So we take something back until the scales are even. And there is truth in that, right? Justice is a kind of balancing. But the thing is this, that's not the full picture. Punishment is not merely retributive, but it's also meant to be medicinal. Just as medicine heals the body, rightly ordered justice is meant, wherever possible, to heal the inner person, to turn him back toward the good that he has abandoned. Punishment at its best is not only the balancing of a scale, but it is also the care of a person, even one who has done something terrible. And if that's right, then prudence requires that before we do anything final, we consider whether the medicinal path is even possible. And if the answer is genuinely no, if a person is so dangerous and unreachable that no healing is possible in the common senses that we may think of, and that society cannot otherwise be protected, then there is an old image for what remains. We cut off the diseased limb to save the body. It is a real image with real force. But see the assumption buried inside it. It treats the criminal, the human criminal, at that final moment as related to society the way a limb is to a body, a part whose worth lies only in its service to the whole, because we are connected to the whole. Human beings are political beings. And so we do have to consider whether that is a true account of the human person. We have to consider whether that is what a human being is. Everything else this semester has pressed the other way. And the honest answer is that he has to somehow be both. The human being has to be both. The human being is a real member of a community, and yet he is not only a mere member, not merely, using this analogy, mere tissue, but rather someone whose dignity does not evaporate even when his actions are monstrous. And so we arrive at what this debate has secretly been about. We begin by saying that justice means giving people what they deserve. But the idea contains two questions, not one, and they can pull against each other. The first is this: what does the criminal deserve, and why? Standing over Gabriel's body, again, we feel its full weight. But a second question hides behind it, and it's not one that is typically asked, but it is very foundational to this debate. And the question is this: what do we owe the criminal? Not what does the criminal owe us, but what do we owe him, given his human nature, given that he is a human being? Such that if we fail to give what we owe to the criminal, we basically act unjustly, even toward the murderer. But notice too, and this is what I want us to really think about. We have to consider whether it's possible to be unjust to a guilty man. Right? If we kill the innocent by mistake, we have been unjust. But if we also kill a man who could have been healed, we may have been unjust as well. That's something to consider. If we take a life out of vengeance, dressed up as justice, then we have been unjust. And so justice does not point in only one direction. It points toward the criminal as something he must pay, and toward the criminal as something or someone that we must not fail to give. And the death penalty is precisely where those two directions can come apart. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you.